Welcome back, viewers. Our focus continues to be the latest as far as Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to India is concerned. He is in New Delhi, and in a short while from now, he's going to receive a ceremonial reception at the Rashtrapati Bhawan, which you can see right behind me. We are getting you everything that you need to know as far as this biggest story is concerned. And joining me right now on the broadcast is Salvatore Babons, who is an American sociologist. Good morning. Thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now. It's a visit that the world is also going to be watching very, very closely. What is it that you're going to be looking for as Putin, the Russian president, here is, in India?
I'm mainly interested in the international reaction. I think in India, of course, you have things covered. And this is not a controversial visit in India, but of course, in the rest of the world, it's highly controversial. The rest of the world is questioning whether India is seeking to join the West or seeking to join some kind of Russia-China grouping. I've even seen reputable newspapers in the West talk about, believe it or not, Western newspapers talking about an Indian rapprochement with China brokered by Russia. Now, of course, that's ridiculous, and any Indian on the street would know that that's ridiculous, but it doesn't stop Western commentators from believing it.
Well, absolutely. Western media can report what suits the Western media, what suits their narrative really. But how are you viewing this particular visit? It's going to be high on optics. We all know that. It's going to be second meeting of the Prime Minister with Russian President Vladimir Putin after that very interesting meeting of three big leaders that we saw in Tianjin a couple of months ago. What is it that you think could really happen? Do you think even Trump is going to be watching this meeting very, very carefully, given the kind of warnings that Trump has given to India for oil imports?
I think what most Western commentators don't realize, even at the very highest levels of U.S. diplomacy, is that this sort of meeting is relatively routine for Russia and India. That is, Russia and India have a normal relationship that two sovereign states would have. They have President Putin and Prime Minister Modi have a lot to discuss. There's a strong bilateral relationship. Of course, defense is at the center of that, but there's also the issue of Russian oil purchases by India and the potential for a deepening of the economic relationship. That's something that Russia desperately needs, is a deepening of the India-Russia economic relationship. For India, it doesn't matter very much. India only exports some $4 billion a year to Russia, but of course, Russia exports $66 billion a year to India. At least those are the 2024 figures. So it's really an important meeting for India, but it's not an out-of-the-ordinary meeting for India. And that's something that it's difficult for Western commentators and even Western diplomats to understand, that this is just business as usual for India and Russia.
Right. And Salvatore Babons, the big question then that arises is that we've seen the Trump administration using tariffs as a negotiating tool when it comes to diplomacy, even though the original concern may have been to try and balance trade between other countries. But the point that many are observing and the point of view that is expressed in India, and you rightly said, it's nothing out of the ordinary for India. There's something that has, historical ties, there's a background to it in terms of defense procurement also. While India has been hugely dependent on Russia, it's now trying to diversify. But the point that many are observing is that somewhere in Washington, D.C., there doesn't seem to be a realization of the, compulsions, the diplomatic priorities and the historic perspectives that India finds itself in. Why do you think that is the case?
First, I have to say there is a complete ignorance of Indian diplomatic history in both the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States. This meeting is being seen in the United States by both parties, by all newspapers, by the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. They're all viewing this as India somehow cozying up to Russia, or India choosing Russia over the West. And of course, nothing could be more ridiculous. This is just India pursuing ordinary diplomacy. But the perception in the West is all about Russia, Ukraine, as if nothing else mattered to the rest of the world besides Russia, Ukraine. Now, of course, Russia, Ukraine is a very big issue in U.S. politics, but as you well know, it's just not the big issue in Indian politics. That's completely lost on most American commentators who simply don't understand the context for these meetings.
Right, and the marked difference that we've seen in the Indian approach, while we've seen several of President Trump's advisors, Trump himself, of course, calling India and Russia dead economies, Peter Navarro and co, several of these top, U.S. officials who've made extremely controversial, some would say, derogatory and disparaging remarks about India. Now, this comes soon after those tariffs were imposed. Many here believe that India's response has been extremely mature, extremely measured, because you haven't heard that kind of rhetoric coming in from any of India's top ministers, Prime Minister, or anyone at the senior level, despite the fact that trade negotiations have been protracted and they've taken extremely long. The big question is that when is America going to now realize that India, its own strategic perspectives and its own alliances are in line, which are largely in line with the United States? It is perhaps time to end the entire rhetoric surrounding trade so that they can move beyond and ensure that, diplomacy and things can go on as they were in the situation preceding these tariffs. How quickly do you see that happening?
India's diplomacy has always been quiet and, you might say, diplomatic. American diplomacy is nothing like that. And unfortunately, to a large extent, U.S. diplomacy is up to the highest bidder. There has been a close evolving relationship between the Trump administration and Pakistan, and members of the Trump family, and for that matter, and Pakistan. Of course, Trump came to office with a very anti-China agenda. Everyone would make fun of Trump saying China, China, China. But in fact, there are very strong business interests of the United States in China. The business interests are relatively smaller for the U.S. in India, and so India is played largely for domestic politics. Donald Trump's actions against India have not been criticized heavily by Democrats. If anything, they've been endorsed by Democrats. And that's something that is really driven by domestic U.S. politics and not by a mature approach to diplomacy. So unfortunately, I don't think the Trump tariffs on India are likely to be raised, at least not to be raised in a diplomatic way. They may be raised in some grand public gesture, but it won't be due to an improvement in U.S.-India relations. It'll be due to something driven entirely by U.S. domestic politics.
Okay. I also want to ask you a little bit about the kind of reception President Putin got here in India. How Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself tweaking the protocol, when to receive him at the airport, and also, President Putin then was in Prime Minister's vehicle when he went to Prime Minister's residence here in the national capital. What do you make of this gesture? Do you think this is definitely much more than diplomacy? It's also a sign of friendship between these two leaders?
I strongly suspect that Vladimir Putin would have asked for some public show of friendship in light of the fact that Russia has become so isolated on the global stage. Now, obviously, I don't have any inside source of information on that, but it seems like the obvious thing that this is something that matters to the Russian side, and so India is obliging. It doesn't seem like this is something that's important from the Indian side, which is to say that I suspect that India will get something in return for being so overtly welcoming to Vladimir Putin. This must be a negotiating chip, not simply a show of friendship. Shows of friendship are not what happens in diplomacy. This is all about getting advantage for India. What
so
advantage
when
India
Donald Trump, the U.S. president, also went to receive President Putin in a similar manner in Alaska, was that also for negotiating something, to get something out of the Russian administration?
Oh, absolutely. Donald Trump was trying to get a deal from Putin on the Ukraine war, and he was extravagantly making a show of, we'll welcome you back in. You can even come to the United States. You won't be arrested. You'll be welcomed. But I want you to give me what I want on the war. Now, they didn't get to an agreement at that point, but it certainly was Donald Trump's hope that by being welcoming to Vladimir Putin, he could in return get what he wanted, which was a resolution to the Ukraine war. Well,
absolutely. And, Mr. Bhawan's now official pictures coming in for that ceremonial welcome of of the President of Russia, President Putin, of course, being welcomed in the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhawan. And this is, of course, the first of his many stops today. He's beginning, of course, with an official call on at Rashtrapati Bhavan, following which, of course, he's going to be going to the Rajghat. There will be, of course, a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Modi. Following that, there will be a business roundtable, one of the many meetings that President Putin has, of course, through the course of the day. Thank you so much, Salvatore Bobons, for joining us and sharing with us your perspective and understanding of all that's going on and making sense of what really is happening around us. We're going to slip into a very quick break. More news and updates, on-ground coverage in just a few moments. Stay tuned.